Okay, let's get going. Thank you everyone for joining us on this Monday evening, afternoon, or morning, wherever you're from in the world. And thank you for joining. Today we have Mark Bradbourne, who is former Tableau ambassador and current Tableau employee, going to talk us through his storytelling tips from Pixar. Mark, over to you.
Thanks, Lorna. Hello, everybody. As Lorna said, my name is Mark Bradbourne. I live and work in Cleveland, Ohio in the United States, and I am a lead solutions engineer for Tableau. I was a Tableau ambassador before joining, and I also led the local user group here in Cleveland. I've spent the last 20 years in analytics as a practitioner, and then about a year and a half ago, I moved into Tableau onto the pre-sales engineering team. Now, before that, I was working in areas like banking. I worked for a law firm. I worked in an internet company, real estate, manufacturing, retail, all over the spectrum regarding data. And the one thing that holds true is that every data tells a story. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm a big fan of the Information Lab, so I'm just pleased as punch to be here. And well, let's go ahead and jump in. So today, I want to intertwine data visualization with storytelling tips from Pixar. But first, I need to put us all in the right mind space, and I'm going to share an example. It's 4 minutes from the movie Up. So if you got a Kleenex, go ahead and grab one. All right. I will apologize for doing that to you. If it's, back up. If it's any consolation, I do actually shed a bit of a tear every time I watch that clip. It is pure storytelling magic and not a word is spoken. In my opinion, it's probably one of the greatest stories ever told by Pixar in a little over 4 minutes. Now, for those who haven't seen it or are not following the chat, this is a snippet from the movie Up. And to me, not just this, but Pixar studios are among some of the best storytellers. And if I think back to any of the movies that have really moved me emotionally in the recent years, the majority of them have been Pixar films. And the amazing part, like I said, is these powerful moments have no dialogue at all. Data visualization is the same way. There's no words generally, it's just the visual. But if done right, it can be just as powerful, albeit in a different way. Unless your dashboard is, showing that you're losing a lot of money, and then you might cry as well. Regardless. But let's jump in and see how we can be more deliberate in our storytelling with data. And to do that, I'm going to employ the help of Emma Coates. Now, in 2012, if memory serves, Emma Coates, also known as @LawnRocket on Twitter, she shared 22 storytelling tips that she had learned while she was a Pixar artist. Now she actually works for Google, and she tries to make their voice assistant more human and conversational. But anyway, while all 22 don't really relate to data visualization, there are a few that I will call universal truths that can be applied to our work as data professionals. And I'm going to attempt to draw a line between the Pixar storytelling tips and how you can potentially approach data visualization. Now, these are the 22 tips. If you're interested in reading them all, Googling 22 storytelling tips from Pixar will get you a lot of different blog posts talking about her lists. But these are the 10 that I'm really going to focus on today. So we'll start where any good list starts, at number 2. Number 2 stated that you've got to keep in mind what's interesting to you as an audience, not what you is fun to do as a writer. They can be very different. Now, when we think about dashboards or visualizations, we need to visualize that data for the audience, the consumer of the data. What information do they need? What is the critical question that they're trying to answer in that moment? A Sankey might answer the question, and it might be fun to build, and it looks cool, but that doesn't mean that it's right. Really advanced chart types might be amazing to share, and they push the edge of art a lot of the time. But while those with technical understanding will appreciate that effort, the audience might find themselves confused and ultimately disengaged. We need to keep the audience's data literacy and their data intimacy in mind. If you're using a new chart type or even a tried and true visualization method, consider including a key so they have greater understanding. Approach the viz from your audience's point of view. You created it, so of course you understand it, but you don't know if they will or not. If need be, find someone with no background in visualization or background in the data that you're showing and ask them what the visualization is saying. Viz for the audience. Like I said, many times for personal visualization products, I will show them to my wife, who is a 5th grade writing teacher. If she gets it, if she gets the story, I've done my job. And if she doesn't, she actually usually will point me in a direction that I wouldn't have thought of to make that viz better. A good example of this is this viz from Sarah Bartlett. Here is a set of multiple area charts. But even something as simple as an area chart can benefit the user with some explanation. If you're not from London, you don't realize that these are actually laid out in kind of the boroughs or sections of London. But what this chart is showing is 2011 versus the projected population of London in 2050. It's set up beautifully with the title. There's some copy on the left side of the viz. And if we zoom in, we can actually see a key. Here she utilizes that key to how to read this chart. This ensures the user truly understands what they are seeing, and hopefully it leads to clearer insights. Don't assume that a basic chart type will be clear to the user. Different levels of data literacy or data intimacy will affect comprehension of the dashboard. So employ all of those tools you have so that the message is clear. All right, tip number 5, simplify, focus, combine characters, hop over detours. You'll feel like you're losing valuable stuff, but it sets you free. Now, nothing is more fun than a huge data set, right? You're looking at tons of dimensions, tons of measures. You're going to start creating sets and groups and calculations. It is the best day ever. No, pause. You don't have to use every piece of data just because it's there. Simplify for the sake of your own data story, so that you aren't just like paralyzing the audience with data that's unnecessary to the story. Support the narrative, don't drown in it. At work, we start with a stakeholder question. We answer that question, and then we should stop. If there are more questions, they will come. And if they don't, mission accomplished. If there are questions, ask yourself if the information stands on its own, or does it need to live in the original dashboard? Don't be afraid to break things apart, use action links, navigation buttons to make the user move between visualizations. One trap that I've seen a lot of people fall into is this I need to see everything on one screen argument that stakeholders will like to throw up. Now, if you have to scroll 5 screens worth of real estate to see all of the elements, I question, is it really on one screen? So push back and give them a better experience. Now, a good place to practice this is Makeover Monday. I'm sure most of the audience is familiar, but if you're not, go to makeovermonday.co.uk and you can learn all about that community project. But it's a great way to practice this to really refine your storytelling. And on occasion, there is a really large data set presented. And it's a great exercise to pare down and find a small, meaningful story to present. This simplification and amplification of a missed story can be really impactful. And some might say, well, I don't have the time to do that extra work. I don't have time to do practice. So honestly, enter it into your development plan at work. Find peers to do it with internally and learn from each other. An hour a week is all it takes. So here's an example. This is a visualization that I made, and I made it personal to me. We were presented with 750 million rows of data about UK pharmaceutical prescriptions. Now, a little overwhelming when I first looked at it. But then I decided on how can I make this personal to me? So I picked the town my last name comes from. So I might live in the United States, but if you're in the Derbyshire area of the UK, you might be familiar with the village of Bradbourne. And then I picked the town my dad was from, which is Bradford, and where my mom was from, which is Redcar. So by boiling it down, I got a little bit clearer of a picture. Then I figured, let's look at the drug that I was actually on at the time, metformin. So by boiling this data set down to a little bite-sized chunk, I was able to build a little comprehensive story. And the thought of trying to visualize every data point in that giant data set is kind of crazy. So simplifying it for the sake of consumption is really the only way to go. All right. Come up with your ending before you figure out the middle. Seriously, endings are hard. Get yours working up front. Now, if you've ever done a puzzle, you don't start a puzzle without looking at the picture. Well, there's a reason for it. Before you put miles on the mouse, define your story, and then kind of work backwards. Now, don't get me wrong. Don't discount playing with the data. You got to start at a point and find interesting stories, but you can go through, you can identify your dimensions and your measures, any calculations that jump out as must-have. You can put those foundations in place, then find the story, but then find your ending. Know what you're working towards, and then work on telling that story. You can, and I'm guilty of meandering through a viz, but it's way easier to find that ending point and know where you're going first. Now, to that end, this tip, number 11, putting it on paper lets you start fixing it. If it stays in your head, the perfect idea, you'll never share it with anybody. Now, once you find those stories, don't hesitate to walk away from your computer and draw the viz out just by sketching it. Draw that viz on paper first, draw multiple versions of ideas. So if you start working and you have to go in a different direction, you can fix and refine as you go. Working on paper frees you from what you know how to do in Tableau. Create the idea, then figure out how to execute it. I actually have a sketch pad on my desk and a set of colored pencils, and I use them to sketch out ideas all the time, basic color schemes, and even interactivity if I want to move between elements. This process helps me a great deal, and especially if I'm feel myself falling into a viz rut, kind of doing the same chart types over and over again. Here's a picture of a sketch that I did about wind power with the visualization on the right side. I had found the story about Texas being ranked #1, but I wasn't convinced because I wasn't quite sure how the ranking was being done. So I did a little digging. I created some test vizzes. I produced kind of a basic story. And then I went to my sketch pad and started coming up with that wireframe. And you can see I highlighted some different metrics. I even sketched out some icons, just kind of lay out how I wanted it to look. And then once I reopened Tableau, I found it was really easy to translate my drawings into visualizations. And I even refined it a little bit. You can see I went for state icons rather than kind of the KPI icons and things like that. So you're not locked in, but it definitely gives you a bit of a roadmap. Now, number 14, why must you tell this story? What's the belief burning within you that your story feeds off of? That's the heart of it. Now, vizzing at work is work, but don't be afraid to viz for passion too. It's a great way to learn. It's a great way to perfect your craft. And those skills you learn will have a return on investment when it comes back to working on, your work vizzes. So find out what you're passionate about. Practice your storytelling on those projects, and then it'll find its way into your day-to-day work. I'm constantly surprised at the amount of data that I can find on common topics. Interested in criminal justice, data. Interested in weather, data. Interested in Harry Potter, data. Music, data. Find something you're passionate about and go. Some find this hard to do. It's a time commitment. So box yourself in. Like I said, give yourself an hour a week. It's personal development. And as I've told a lot of people in a lot of the talks that I do, I will always say that jobs are temporary and skills are permanent. So take the time to invest in your skills. If you're not sure what you're passionate about, but you want to give back as a volunteer, another option is to look at social good projects like Viz for Social Good or the Tableau Foundation's Service Corps. These projects work with nonprofit groups to visualize their data and help advance their missions. Now, maybe your company has a philanthropic arm you could volunteer for. Just kind of search around and see what you can find. Once you find what moves you, you can use your skill to move others. Now, this is a passion project I did. As I said, I'm from Cleveland, and I refer to this as my love letter from Cleveland. Cleveland gets a bad rap. It's the river caught on fire back in the 70s and, this, that, and the other, urban decay, whatever. But I looked at all the aspects of Cleveland, and it's actually a really awesome place to live. I gathered all the data myself. I produced the visuals. And this is one of those projects that I did outside of my working hours. I think it was like an hour or two just to kind of put together. And again, I'm just developing skills. All right. Number 16, what are the stakes? Give us a reason to root for the character. What happens if they don't succeed? And then stack the odds against them. In the same regard, what happens if your audience doesn't react to your story? Make that the root of your viz. Put the audience in the viz itself. If you can engage them, provide a call to action for them, you can start to drive change. Now, this is way more obvious at times with work. You can assign it for a branch manager's KPIs or a division's, sales numbers. By, doing a peer-to-peer comparison, it's easy for the consumer to put those messages in the viz and put themselves in the viz. A great example of this was Steve Wexler did a population age visualization, and he built it in such a way that you would put your age in, and it told you how much of the US population was older than you, and it encouraged exploration and sharing. And for the older population among us, it encouraged depression. All right, number 17, no work is ever wasted. If it's not working, let go and move on. It'll come back around to be useful later. So how many times has a viz not worked? Like the idea you had didn't work. That's okay. Save the file, make some notes. You can always come back to it later with a different data set perhaps, or you just use it as a learning opportunity. If you remember that notebook I showed a few slides back, I never rip a page out. Those are my ideas to draw from later. Not everything will work. Others might not work today, but no idea is ever wasted. It's always a learning opportunity. Now, number 18, you have to know yourself. The difference between doing your best and fussing. Story is testing, not refining. Now, it's imperative that you know yourself as a data visualization professional. As an artist, and whether you know it or not, you are an artist, we sometimes feel like we are never done. We can do one more tweak, one more slight color change. Nope, that font might not be quite right. You need to find the difference between your best work and fussing for the sake of fussing. It's easy to get lost in the minutia when the best work is actually completed work. Take it to the next project. I would love to go back to my Tableau public profile and fix a bunch of stuff because I see all kinds of things that I did wrong that I would want to do differently, all the things that I've learned since then, but it's just fussing. I've got to move forward. So find where your I'm just fussing point is. Number 20, exercise. Take the building blocks of a movie you dislike. How do you rearrange them into something you do like? Now, 2 words here to think about as a visualization professional: reverse engineering. If you see a viz you like, then pull it apart and learn from it. On the flip side, if you see a viz you don't like, try reimagining it, aka Makeover Monday. As you deconstruct things you like and don't like, use these vehicles to practice. On Reddit, if you're familiar, there's actually a subreddit called Data is Beautiful. Now, I'm not going to lie, most of them that are published there are not beautiful. It's kind of a rare thing. But sometimes they do provide a link to the data, and you can do a remix, as they call it, of their viz for practice and definitely make it better. So opportunities are out there in great numbers. You just need to look or ask for directions to find them. All right, number 22. What's the essence of your story? The most economical telling of it, if you know that, then you can build out from there. Now, every viz has a core element. It's that central idea. It might be the metric you put up in the upper left, but it's going to be the one thing that brings that story to the end. If you nail that down and then support it with others, you support it with tooltips and texts and image, whether you put that element in the top left Stephen Few style or it's dead center and you artistically place everything around it to draw the user's eye, that core element is the center of your viz's universe. That is your core. And if you've got that, you're halfway home. Now, a lot of people will say to me, Mark, this is great for personal projects, but work's rigid, it's heavily defined, it's focused on results, not stories. That's fluffy. I think we should challenge that. Can you tell a story in a defined results-driven space? Yes. Does it take a little more nuance and refinement? You bet. Work dashboards are driven from critical questions. That is the essence of the story. Personal practice will lead to better work projects. So will the gift of knowing your own tendencies and differences between your best work and just fussing with the viz. You know the budgeting, I'm sorry, you know the stakes of a bad visualization, and so does your stakeholder. And the story must be told because it's important for performance management or budgeting or quotas. Simply in your visualization, by simplifying it, you will lead to better insights. And don't be afraid to guide your audience to those insights. Call them out, annotate. And lastly, understanding the level of data literacy for your consumers. You can make vizzes they understand and learn from, which will allow you to make more complex vizzes later. Work with them and broaden that data knowledge and design vizzes for them. You can do this. It does apply in the real world. So let's do it. Invest in yourself, invest in your data culture, and in your internal Tableau community. Challenge each other, push each other to be better, and there is no limit to where you can end up. And now, please see this disclaimer. I want to thank you all for having me today. I hope you found some value and inspiration among these slides, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. I would love to kind of have a conversation and answer questions with the time remaining. And if there are none, again, thank you. It's been a pleasure to present today. If you would, please connect with me on Twitter, on LinkedIn. You can follow my Tableau Public profile, and let's jump into some questions.
It looks like there is one in there for you, Mark, from Colin Smith. Are there any more alternative types of charts that you've found helpful in your work?
For me, the alternative chart types tend to be more of a learning exercise. I mean, if you look at my Tableau Public profile, there's plenty of times that I've done alternative visualizations just because I wanted to experiment. And I see it as a learning opportunity to learn about Tableau Desktop and kind of see where the edges are. But if I think back to a lot of my kind of professional work, even before Tableau and after Tableau, it's all been kind of what I would class as the basic chart types. The bar and line are kind of the Swiss Army knives of data visualization. Then you kind of experiment from there. For some comparisons, like a lot of people use bullet charts, I will sometimes use like a DNA or a barbell chart, which I class as a little bit of an alternative chart. So it just depends. All right, so anonymous attendee asks, my boss has a hatred of pie charts. What is your immediate thought when thinking of a replacement to a pie chart? Honestly, my first go-to is generally a bar chart. But if it's like a pie chart that just has two numbers, I pick the most important of the two numbers and I'll just do a band. I worked in a bank most recently before Tableau, and pie charts are the fifth food group. So I know your struggle. But unfortunately, they like the pie charts. At least your boss has a hatred for them. All right, another question here. Do you have any suggestions for someone switching to a tech career after staying home and raising her spawn for 20 years? My biggest recommendation would be build your portfolio on Tableau Public, get involved with community projects and practice. I recommend getting a mentor. If you're not familiar, there is a community initiative called mentoringmeetup.com. If you go there, you can kind of request a mentor who might help shepherd your career a little bit. The beautiful thing about the Tableau community, if that's specifically where you're looking to work, is it's super supportive and they want you to succeed and everybody will revel in that success. So definitely plug in to the community and just go. And if you've got questions, like I said, connect with me on Twitter. I will be happy to introduce you around and get you plugged in with some of those resources. Steve asks, which one of these tips resonates most with you? Honestly, it's the one about the difference between being done and fussing. For the longest time, I would perseverate on visualizations, especially in my personal projects, about like colors and this, that, and the other. And I think I've written a couple blog posts where I talk about it, but I've gotten to a point now where I understand that like once I feel like it's done and I start like questioning my prior decisions, I just kind of will walk away from it after I do kind of some testing. If I choose a color palette and then I find it's not accessible, I'll go back and fix it. But understanding what's the difference between done and fussing is, for me, is the one that resonates the most. Colin, back in, how much text do you usually consider the audience will put up with in a dashboard? It depends. Honestly, it depends on the user and it depends on what you're doing. So like things like if you're using something like narrative science where it's doing kind of viz commentary based on the numbers, like the Tableau extension, they might be more cognizant of it. Like if I'm talking about kind of introduction and how to use this viz, I do try to keep that short, no longer than it needs to, so that they can actually interact with the viz. It's really just situational. Paul, I get a feeling that dashboards are dead. People simply can't be bothered to interact, in my experience. Any thoughts? And do you miss Redcar? So I think in some ways you might be right that dashboards are dead. I think the speed in which business moves now, you're seeing a lot more kind of, I need that number now. And, Tableau's done things like included metrics on Tableau server where you can just dial up that number and maybe the line chart, and you can kind of see what that metric is at a glance, and you can put those metrics together on your mobile and you're good. But I also think that there are two levels to a dashboard. There's that surface level. So if I can get the initial story from the surface, I really like, that's good. If I've included some like interactivity and commentary where people can interact with it, that's what the second level is. So I think first level dashboards are important. You've got to get that message out quickly. And I think those dashboards are still, very important. But allowing the user to dig in if they want to, and having that second level of viz is important as well. So, and I actually do miss Redcar. So my aunt still lives there, and my grandparents have passed. But I haven't been over in 16 years. So yeah, I miss all of England. All right. Anonymous attendee. Working on personal projects, sometimes I reach a point where I am not able to find the insight or anything interesting. Is it worth taking the time to pick apart and show why it failed, or just pick better projects? That's a tough question. I think there's learning in the picking apart. I mean, the honest fact is sometimes there isn't a story. Sometimes it's just presenting information. And there is a difference, right? Sometimes there is a story that you can share, and there's impacts and there's call to action. And a lot of times the data is just informational. It's like, this is what happened, unless there's some next best action to say, this is now what I need to do to make change. That can be a definite kind of sticking point and hurdle to get over. So I think when you find yourself in those situations where you're not finding the insight, there's two roads you can go down. You could ask somebody else to see, what insight they might find, or you just present the information. And if you present a way to explore it for the user, they might find the insight, and because you missed it. A lot of times, like I worked in IT, not the business, I wasn't super familiar with the data, so I would present the data as is and let the users find the insight, unless I was working really closely with a stakeholder. All right. These are great questions. Thank you, everybody. All right. So David asks, which is your preferred medium to share a viz for community critique? I tend to lean towards Twitter for feedback, but I will share it both Twitter and LinkedIn generally, just for kind of, sharing, because there are different audiences. And on a very rare occasion, if I really want to feel bad about myself, I'll post it on Reddit. All right. Amy asks, sometimes data sets can be quite big and overwhelming in complexity. Do you have any tips on how to extract a key message or story? Is this a learned skill, or is it always so tricksy? It can be. I find that like really large data sets can be really tricky. What I will tend to do is like I'll load up, like if I'm just thinking about Tableau, I'll load it up in Tableau and I'll look at the dimensions. And before I even drag things out, I will do a right click on the dimension and describe, and then I'll load the values. And I'll find what has kind of the low cardinality, like, what are those high level groupings that, just a few values. And I'll start there, and I'll, start there and start with a measure. And see if there's anything that jumps out. And then I'll add additional dimensions to see, if something starts to jump out. And that's the best way I've found to go about it. But I think everybody's journey on that can be a little different. Like some people will start with a date and see, is there anything like that trends? So, and I think you just have to kind of experiment. And one approach might not work for every data set. So I think the key is always to remain flexible. So I hope that helped. All right. That looked like all the questions. Oh, nope, one more. This is awesome. Thank you. I always feel bad when I do these and like there's no questions. I'm like, oh my God, I'm horrible. I might still be, but you know, whatever. Krishma asks, can you share more channels, pages to follow on Twitter, Reddit for inspiration and data resources? So Data.World is a great place to track for data sets, as well as Kaggle, Kaggle.com. There is a subreddit for data sets. A lot of times it's people asking for data sets, but on occasion somebody might post one. So yeah, I would follow Data.World on Twitter, or just go to their website and sign up. It's free. Same with Kaggle. Those are the two places I go. All right, Luke asks, do you have any tips on how to overcome creative slump when working with personal projects? Luke, do I ever? A couple of years ago, I actually wrote a blog post about viz ruts. I did Makeover Monday for 3 years straight. Like I didn't miss a week for 3 years. And I credit that to how comfortable I am with the data set, or with kind of Tableau and data in general. Sorry, I got distracted because Colin actually reminded me of the Data is Plural newsletter for other data sets. So sorry, let me rewind. So like I actually posed the question to the Tableau community. I'm like, how do you kind of get over like the viz rut? Like, how do you break that? And the overwhelming kind of response that I got was, give yourself a fence. So viz in black and white only. Focus on building a mobile template. You know, time box yourself instead of an hour, see how much you can do in 30 minutes. And if you go, so my blog is sonsofhierarchies.com. It's linked, you can find it on my LinkedIn profile and I think on my Twitter profile. But the blog is out there. Search for viz rut, and there's a lot of different tips. Mike Cisneros, Sarah Bartlett, and a few other folks gave me some really good tips. So I do that whenever I find myself there. So great question. Hamad asks, how to get into data analysis from the technical world? I think it's just practice. You know, find data, analyze it, you know, find insights. Unfortunately, it's not a book you can read really. And then, you know, just go from there. Like for me, it happened accidentally. Like I started as a web designer, and then I moved into what I learned was a data warehousing position, and I was building data warehouses. I didn't know anything about that. So I started in doing ETL, and then I trained somebody else to do ETL, and then I moved into like requirements gathering, and it just kind of became this path that I went down, you know, over a number of years. But like if I'd have known like that I was going to end up in data visualization, I would have like pivoted hard and, you know, changed my trajectory. But I'm glad I'm where I'm at. So honestly, I think it's just exposure, practice. Look for opportunities. Like I said, the Tableau Foundation has the service core. Like if you want to, you know, try to give back, you can do that and get data and analyze it. Some of those things, you know, do end up with outcomes. Viz for Social Good's another way to do that. So I hope that helps. Stuart asks, do you ever build what you think is near perfect, insightful dashboard for the end user and then have them ask you for raw data? Yes. Well, actually only on days that end in Y. Every user wants to be able to export into Excel because that's where they're comfortable. It's like when you go on vacation, you know, it's nice to go on vacation, but it never feels as good as when you sleep in your own bed. So the way that I try to combat that is I will create my visualization, and then I will give them the opportunity to drill down into the details to see the supporting numbers. So that gives them a little bit of comfort. But if they're insistent on exporting it to Excel, the next question that I generally ask them is, well, what do you do with it once you like export it to Excel? And if the answer is, well, I paste it into this other spreadsheet and I have some visuals here, or I have this report here, and these are the insights I'm getting out of it, the requirements should have gotten that. And if they didn't offer that up, they, you know, probably weren't even thinking about it. So I always will ask that question. It's like, okay, well, why? And if I can get to the why, I can tend to get them to not export. But sometimes they always do anyway. So, man, good questions. Holy cow. Oh, Lorna, thanks for posting that blog in the chat. That is it.
You're welcome.
So I see no more questions. That was awesome. Gosh, I want to do a whole chat talk of just the questions.
I have one question because I'm a host. I can't post a question. You have a new thing called real world fake data. Do you want to just explain a little bit about that as to why people should get involved, and hopefully that'll help with some kind of viz rut as well?
Yes, I can talk about that. So yeah, I guess back in November, I started a new community project called Real World Fake Data. If you go to Sons of Hierarchies, there's a link for that at the top, and there's some recaps from the first few projects. And basically what the idea behind it was, a lot of people, it's like, Makeover Mondays, Makeover Monday, and, Workout Wednesdays, Workout Wednesday. But what I wanted to do was have kind of real world data sets where people could build examples of what business dashboards might look like. So I went through the process. I've created 12 data sets that span a bunch of different departments, a bunch of different industries. And every 2 weeks, I release a data set on Data.World. And I'll write a recap if anybody visits it. They'll, I'll pick 2 or 3 a month and say, I really like this. Here's some best practices from it. Give feedback where I can. And it's a great way to practice. And the second piece of it is it puts a bunch of like real world examples on public for people who might be looking for inspiration. Like this month's or the current data set, Project 4, is for call centers. Like most companies have a call center for support. So if you're not reporting on it, maybe you should look at that. And you can go out and you can search. The hashtag is RWFD. And the dashboards, people have done a pretty good job of tagging their dashboards so you can find them. And you find an example and kind of get inspired from it. There's been some really, really beautiful work and some directions on vizzes that I, wouldn't have even thought of. I'm like, hey, that's awesome. So I'm super excited about the project. I'd love it to have more people doing it. So yeah, the link is in the chat for real world fake data, and I'd love to see your vizzes. So question came in from Hamad. How do you know when you got the cleanest data without any bias? You don't. I mean, unless it's being collected from a machine, and that machine is basically just counting things. It's really hard. The bias in data is a whole different conversation. And I would recommend checking out Bridget Cogley's blog, because I think she talks about data bias and ethics in data. Far more experience with it than I am. So.
Perfect. Well, I think we'll close the Q&A there. But Mark, I want to say a big thank you for coming and doing this session for us. It's certainly inspirational, and hopefully it's been inspirational for everyone else on the call. If you do want to find out more information about the other events that we're running here at the Information Lab, please go to til.bi/talkdata, where you can sign up for future events. I know next month we also have Adam McCann from our external community speakers, who's going to be talking about 2020.4 and map layers. So join us for that as well. And once again, thank you, Mark. It's been a pleasure to have you here.
It's been my pleasure to be here. Always good to see friendly faces in the participants and speak with you as well, Lorna.
Thank you very much. And goodbye, good night, stay safe, everyone, and see you all soon.
Bye, everybody.